There are days that change you forever, days that break everything you thought was certain, days that silently divide your life into a before and an after. I never saw it coming. I thought pain would announce itself with some warning. I thought losing everything would come with sirens, loud noises, something to prepare my heart, but it came quietly. It slipped in between coffee cups and morning meetings, in between the laughter I shared and the dreams I built carefully. And when it came, it tore through me like a storm I had no shelter for. It was an ordinary day, the kind of day you barely notice because nothing feels unusual. I had coffee at my favorite place. I smiled at a few strangers. I answered emails. I called my mother like I always did. And somewhere in those small, safe moments, life began its quiet unraveling. I lost my job first. A simple meeting, a few polite sentences, restructuring, economic pressure. They were sorry. I nodded because that is what we do when we are trained to be professional. I nodded, walked out of that office, and sat in my car, staring at the steering wheel, feeling nothing. Not yet, not the full weight of it, not until later. Then came the next wave. My mother's voice on the phone, frantic, broken, telling me my father had collapsed. I dropped everything. I drove like the world was ending. Maybe it was. Maybe it already had. Hospitals have a particular kind of smell, a sterile, lonely air that clings to your clothes and your soul. I sat there for hours, waiting, bargaining with a God I barely spoke to anymore, telling him I would give up anything, everything, if he would just let my father open his eyes again. He never did. They say grief comes in stages. They say you will be angry, then sad, then accepting. They never tell you that grief is not polite. It does not move through you in neat little steps. It stays. It crawls into your skin and lives there. It changes the way you see everything. It makes the sunlight seem cruel and the laughter of strangers unbearable. I buried my father on a cloudy afternoon. I watched the man who taught me how to ride a bicycle, the man who stood in the rain, waiting for my school bus, the man who called me his little star, disappear into the earth. And with him, I buried a part of myself I thought I would never get back. The days that followed are a blur. I forgot how to breathe properly. I forgot how to smile without feeling guilty. I forgot how to exist without feeling like I was intruding on a world that kept spinning, completely unaware that mine had stopped. I lost friends, not because they were cruel, but because I was unreachable. How do you explain to someone that you are grieving a version of yourself you can never return to? How do you make them understand that sometimes you are not ignoring them, you are just trying to survive your own mind? Bills piled up. The reality of losing my job, my security, hit me harder than I expected. I sold my car. I moved into a smaller apartment. I canceled birthday plans. I skipped weddings. I let messages go unanswered. I let life happen without me. And somewhere in that darkness, somewhere in that silence, something unexpected began to grow. It was not hope. Not yet. Hope is too grand a word for something so fragile. It was breath. It was the realization that I was still breathing, that no matter how heavy the grief sat in my chest, no matter how empty the days felt, I was still here, alive, broken, but breathing. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough for now. I started small. I made my bed in the mornings. Some days, I got out of bed just to sit by the window and watch the sky change colors. Some days, I wrote a few lines in a dusty notebook. Most days, I did not write anything profound. Sometimes it was just, I am still here. And slowly, painfully, beautifully, something inside me shifted. I stopped measuring my worth by my productivity. I stopped defining my value by the size of my paycheck or the number of people texting me on a Friday night. I stopped apologizing for being slow, for being quiet, for not having it all together. I learned how to sit with myself in the silence. I learned that healing does not look like the movies. It is not a triumphant montage of gym workouts and career victories. Healing is ugly. Healing is lying on the floor crying because you miss someone who is never coming back. Healing is making tea for yourself when you would rather stay hungry. Healing is getting up again and again, even when your legs feel like they are made of stone. I learned that love does not end with death. It stays. It lingers in the way you tie your shoes, the way you make your tea, the way you hear a song and smile, because it reminds you of a Sunday afternoon long ago. I learned that strength is not pretending you are fine. Strength is admitting when you are broken. Strength is asking for help when you need it. Strength is forgiving yourself on the days you fall apart. And somewhere along the way, life stopped feeling like a punishment. It started feeling like an invitation to rebuild, an invitation to rediscover, an invitation to live, not the life I had planned, but the life that was waiting for me beneath all the noise. A simpler life, a life where I found joy in small things, a cup of coffee with a friend who did not need me to pretend, a walk by the river where the only expectation was to breathe, a handwritten letter left in my mailbox by a neighbor who barely knew me but cared enough to say, "You are not alone." I found a job again, not the high-powered position I once craved, but something smaller, something slower, something that let me go home at 5 o'clock and sit with my grief without shame. I made new friends, people who had also been broken, people who understood that healing is not something you do alone, but something that happens in the spaces between shared silences and soft laughter. And one evening, sitting on my balcony as the sun dipped below the horizon, I realized something that made my breath catch in my throat. I had not lost everything. I had lost illusions. I had lost the need to prove myself. I had lost the belief that my worth was tied to my achievements, but I had gained something greater. I had found myself, the real me, the one who could sit in silence and still feel whole, the one who could love without fear, the one who could live without needing permission. And that, I realized, was everything. The seasons changed slowly. The air grew colder. The leaves turned from bright green to gold and crimson, and then fell silently to the ground. Every morning, I would sit by the window and watch the world shift. A part of me shifted with it. The old me, the one who rushed from moment to moment, chasing something I could never name, was falling away too. In its place was someone softer, someone slower, someone who no longer needed noise to feel alive. I started noticing the little things, the way the morning sunlight touched the corner of my desk, the way the smell of rain lingered long after the clouds had passed, the laughter of children walking home from school, the kindness of strangers who held open doors without expecting anything in return. I began to understand that life is built not in grand moments, but in millions of small ones stitched quietly together. Grief still visited sometimes, unexpected, uninvited. It would creep in through a familiar song or an old photograph. It would wrap itself around my chest and squeeze until it was hard to breathe. But I learned not to fight it. I learned to sit with it, to let it pass through me like a storm that knows it will eventually move on. I realized that grief is not something you conquer. It is something you learn to carry. Some days it feels heavy. Some days it feels like nothing more than a whisper. I found new dreams too, not the loud, ambitious ones that had once fueled me, but quieter ones. Dreams of writing stories that might make someone feel a little less alone. Dreams of building a life rooted in presence instead of performance. Dreams of waking up each morning and choosing joy even when sadness sat close by. One afternoon, I was sitting in a small park, notebook in hand, when an old man sat down beside me. We exchanged a few polite words, and then, out of nowhere, he said, "The trick to life is not to outrun the storms. It is to dance in the rain." I smiled politely, not really sure what to say. But that night, those words came back to me. And for the first time, I truly understood them. I had spent so long waiting for the pain to end, waiting for the sadness to lift, waiting for life to feel good again. But maybe life was not about waiting for perfect days. Maybe it was about learning to find beauty, even in the broken ones. Maybe it was about dancing, even if the sky was gray and the ground was muddy. So I started dancing. Not literally at first. I danced in small ways. I said yes to coffee dates. I watched sunsets without checking the time. I called old friends and told them I missed them. I forgave myself for all the times I had fallen short. I wrote letters I never sent. I sat by my mother's side and held her hand without filling the silence with words. And sometimes, when the apartment was empty and the music was soft, I really danced, clumsy, awkward, joyful, and little by little, the heaviness in my chest began to lift, not all at once. Healing is rarely sudden. It is a slow thaw, a gentle unfolding, but it happened. It is happening still. There were setbacks, of course. Healing is not a straight line. There were days when loneliness pressed against my ribs so hard I thought I might break. Days when doubt whispered that I had wasted too much time, that I had lost too much, that I would never be whole again. But I learned to answer those doubts with kindness. I learned to remind myself that progress is not measured by how quickly you move forward, but by how courageously you stay when everything inside you wants to run. I learned to stay with the fear, with the sadness, with the hope. I learned to stay present for my own life. One crisp autumn morning, I decided to visit the cemetery. I had not been back since the funeral. I was scared of the flood of memories, scared of what it would feel like to stand there, face to face with the finality of it all. But I knew it was time. I cried that day, but they were not the tears of helplessness that had once consumed me. They were the tears of someone who had walked through fire and emerged softer, not harder. Someone who had learned that real strength is not about never breaking, It is about breaking open and letting the light in. As winter approached, I found a small sense of rhythm in my days: mornings of writing, afternoons of work, evenings of tea, and quiet reflection. I made a home out of the little apartment I once hated. I filled it with books and candles and music. I let it become a sanctuary instead of a prison. One evening, as snow fell gently outside, I lit a candle and wrote a letter to myself. Not the old self, not the broken one, but the version of me who had survived. I wrote, "I am proud of you for staying, for trying, for believing in a life beyond the one you lost. You are enough. You have always been enough." And somewhere deep inside, I believed it. The new year came. I did not make resolutions. I made promises. I promised to be gentle with myself. I promised to honor my grief without letting it define me. I promised to choose love over fear, presence over perfection, courage over comfort. And as the days unfolded, life continued to whisper. In the laughter of new friends, in the softness of early morning light, in the quiet satisfaction of small victories, in the resilience of a heart that had every reason to close, but chose to remain open. I understood now that life would never be the same, and that was okay. It was never supposed to be. Loss carves into us, yes, but it also makes space for new beginnings, space for unexpected joys, space for a depth of living that those who have never been broken may never fully understand. I no longer chase happiness. I no longer wait for life to be perfect before allowing myself to feel joy. I find joy in the imperfect moments, in the laughter shared over burnt toast, in the way the sky looks just before a storm, in the feeling of being alive, messy and magnificent and human. And if you are sitting in your own darkness right now, wondering if it will ever get better, please believe me when I say it will. Not in the way you expect, not in the timeline you hope for, but it will. Healing does not erase the pain. It teaches you how to carry it with grace. It teaches you how to dance in the rain. You will laugh again. You will dream again. You will love again, not despite the pain, but because of it, because you will understand, in a way you never did before, how precious it all is, how fleeting, how miraculous it is simply to breathe and to hope and to keep choosing life. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are becoming. And becoming is the bravest thing you will ever do. Stay for the mornings you have not seen yet. Stay for the songs you have not heard. Stay for the laughter you have not shared. Stay for the love that is still waiting for you. Stay for the version of you who is already proud you made it this far. Stay, because one day you will look back and realize that the day you thought was your ending was actually